So thanks everybody for joining tonight. I'm excited to welcome you to our discussion today, which is impacting climate change and sustainability, starting with food. We'll talk about sustainability kind of in a broader lens, but kind of focusing some of that on the food system. The event is being put on by the Tufts Entrepreneurs Network in partnership with the Office of Alumni Relations. For those who don't know what Tufts Entrepreneurs Network is, this group serves as a resource for alumni in the technology and startup spaces and helps alumni looking to transition from the corporate world to the technology and startup space. It's also for a resource for the university and the Tufts Entrepreneurship Center. On that note, I'll let Elaine, the director of the Entrepreneurship Center, say hello.
Hello, hi, my name is Elaine Chen. I am with the Derby Entrepreneurship Center that's newly renamed since our naming gift. Super happy to be here, and I will have asked for all of you for later.
Awesome. At the end of today, we're going to have an open 20-minute period for questions. The thinking behind us doing a meeting format tonight is that you guys can ask questions in person as long as things don't get too out of control. I'd like you guys to be able to interface with our panelists today directly. As for me, I'm Shelby Schultz. I'm an alumna from the class of 2012 and a member of the Tufts Entrepreneurs Network National Chapter and the Austin Alumni Chair. I'm part of 10 because I'm inspired by the entrepreneurial problem-solving spirit present in Tufts students, and I believe it is important we continue to foster this tenacity and learn from our great network. So I have some quick bios from our panelists today, and I'm sure they're going to go more deeply into their work, but they've all done some really impressive things. So I'll read them quickly, and then Eric, Kim, and Jess, if you guys have anything to add to it, feel free to interrupt me. We have Eric Wilburn today, the head of business development for Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, supporting the launch and scaling of Gorongosa's revenue-generating eco-enterprises across carbon credits, regenerative agribusiness, ecotourism, and sustainable forestry. Eric first began working with eco-enterprises and communities to protect and restore nature while serving in the Peace Corps in Mozambique, just after finishing undergraduate at Tufts. Eric is passionate about putting local communities in the driver's seat when it comes to protecting and restoring nature by ensuring that they are the center of future green economies. In addition to Gorongosa, Eric currently leads the team launching the Carbon Commons, a global community hub and accelerator for nature-based carbon projects. We have Kim McKee. I wrote down Kim Reisman because that's how I know you. Kim McKee is the chief of staff at Spoiler Alert, a B2B sales and supply chain software company that works with leading CPG brands such as Nestle and Kraft Heinz to manage excess and short-dated inventory. At Spoiler Alert, Kim works on company strategy and operations and also leads efforts to engage and support Spoiler Alert's network of secondary market outlets that opportunistically purchase excess inventory. Kim began her career in venture capital, where she evaluated early stage investments in the B2B software sector for OpenView Venture Partners and General Catalyst. She left VC in 2013 to join Instacart as one of their first 100 employees, where she managed partnerships and operations with grocery retailers such as Whole Foods, Star Market, and H Mart in New England. Kim has an MA in food studies from NYU and a BA from Tufts University. And last but not least, Jess Vieira, PhD and Director of Sustainability at Apeel. Jess leads sustainability at Apeel by using data-driven analyses to maximize the net environmental and societal benefits of Apeel's product and operations. Her work in life cycle thinking and climate positive approaches is crucial to maximizing Apeel's positive impact opportunities related to climate change, food waste, market access for small producers and emerging economies, and food security. Before joining Apeel, she worked on environmental sustainability at both Dow and Apple. She currently sits on the advisory committee for Kroger's Zero Hunger, Zero Waste Foundation Innovation Fund, established to help support new food systems and technologies reshaping the food supply. So welcome, guys. To start, we always like to start with just a silly icebreaker question. So we've done the Carmichael DeWitt. We've all been there, done that. So uphill or downhill to start today?
Definitely uphill. Carm for life.
I'm with you. +1.
I was in the engineering school, so I'm going to say downhill. Then you could just go around as opposed to having to go up and down those stairs.
I feel like I played a lot of Frisbee golf at Tufts, and we were always on the upper hill part of campus more so. So I'll go uphill.
Oh, a house divided. Awesome. Thanks for indulging that question. So we're gonna kick off with kind of just like a broad discussion-based question, but the three of you have been working kind of in the sustainability world for a while. So I'd love for you to talk about your initial interest in attacking this problem, apart from like obvious things like we know there's a climate crisis. You can just respond, or I can pick someone.
Sure, I can go first. So I think, you know, and some of this is why I decided to go to Tufts too. I think, you know, just wanting to make a positive impact on the world and thinking about, you know, some of the really large challenges that we're facing and this kind of responsibility to use the education and resources that we have to create a positive change. I think more specifically thinking about food systems. When you look at the different sectors that you can focus on in sustainability, you know, you can think about improving certain industries, but, you know, then you start questioning sometimes, you know, do I want to be improving this industry? Should this industry continue to be more robust? But when it comes to food, and especially, you know, certain types of food that are more nutritious, it's so necessary. It's really like when you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, we all need food, and it's, you know, one of the few products that everyone interacts with many times every single day. And so I think when you really think about the impact that you can have by making small changes to the food system, it's just, you know, certainly the size and scale of the impact, but also how personal it can be, made it an attractive area for me to focus on.
Good point. Eric and Kim, you guys have anything to add?
I'll just briefly say, I think it was really after Tufts when I had my eyes open to the global food system. And I mean, especially just how food is produced very differently in different places around the world. And I spent a lot of my 20s in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's just, you know, a very different process, but we are in a very globalized world. So knowing where your food comes from, how is it produced, who's producing it, how are they paid for the work that they're doing on the ground, I think is vital. So that, you know, the supply chain for food is so fascinating all the way through to, you know, what Jess and Kim are doing, you know, amazing work on in terms of the food that we do get here. Let's make sure that it stays like in good conditions and that we're using it to its fullest capacity, because there are people working really hard on the ground around the world to make sure that it gets there. But the supply chain is fascinating.
I definitely came at it as through food as like an interest and a hobby and something that I'm just one of those people who's always thinking about their next meal. And I love food. And when I left BC, I wanted to work as an operator and I really wanted to work in food tech. So I started working at Instacart and I spent a lot of time in grocery stores. And I just noticed, oh my God, there's so much waste happening here. And it like kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, especially in a grocery store environment. That's where a lot of the waste happens. So I became really passionate about the issue that way and learned more about climate and climate change through food. So that's always been my lens. One of my personal challenges to myself right now is actually to learn more about climate change outside of just the food lens, because I'm so obsessed with that little part of this problem.
Mm-hmm. Those are really good points. I hadn't really think about it in terms of, you know, that's something that everyone needs, because I think we want to tackle big things like fossil fuel. I mean, I'm from Texas, the gas industry, it's very interesting. Like the city of Houston is changing a lot because the industry was oil and gas. And I think we want to make those big changes fast, but like, is that going to touch everyone? So that's a really interesting point. We had a pre-submitted question that kind of plays off of this. So I know that I'm not an expert in this, but the question was, how serious is the problem of climate change in relation to our food supply? Could you guys talk a little bit about that and what you know?
Yeah, well, at the highest level, the food sector is responsible for 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions, which is interesting. And, especially leading up to, or not leading up to, they started, but these meetings in Glasgow right now, food is not specifically on the agenda for COP26. And so what we're seeing actually is, because it's this elephant in the room, literally, and I have an elephant in my room, and of course we all love elephants because we're from Tufts. There's so much interest in elevating the food sector in Glasgow this week and next. I think there's dozens of side events and NGOs kind of stepping up to, and even the media actually, like the New York Times is doing a lot about the food system next week. And so, yeah, it's a really big contributor. And actually, both Kim and I are focused on this issue of food waste, because 1/3 of food that's produced goes to waste. Food waste itself, not food, but just the food we throw away, is responsible for 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, like there's so many sectors that are indirectly wrapped into that, energy, fertilizer, transportation. But if we can shift consumption patterns and make our food system more efficient, there's certainly, I don't think there's any way for us to, meet the Paris Agreement without considering changes to the food system.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add that, food and how we produce it can be a carbon sink. If we use regenerative ag methodologies and essentially get that carbon in and make sure we're doing no tilling and we're doing cover cropping and all those things, there are a lot of methodologies that groups are starting to use now to actually turn agriculture into a sink. I mean, we're growing plants, right? Plants eat carbon and they breathe out CO2. And if you do it in the right way, you can actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere. So a lot of the work that I do now in the carbon credit space is where ag is starting to look at the carbon sequestration potential. And maybe some of these alternative methodologies cost a little bit more than fertilizers or traditional monoculture. But if carbon credits can help to subsidize that, then there might be a business model that works, that's scalable.
In terms of, is there like a number one most urgent problem within the food system that you guys think about often or read about often that we should be kind of like focusing more heavily on?
I think, food waste is front and center. I think shifting to plant-based diets is a very, big way, whether that's a complete shift or even like a flexitarian approach or, whatever that shift looks like, it's not all or nothing. But the inefficiencies of eating cow production and the calories in versus calories out, it just doesn't make sense. And so there's huge kind of environmental benefits of shifting to plant-based diets. I would say another area is the use of plastic packaging. Is a big opportunity, and there's a lot of challenges in doing that from like a food safety standpoint and addressing perishability as well, but certainly one that's kind of ripe for innovation, where we're starting to see in places like Europe regulation coming into play that might help, or even like the threat of regulation that might help. So those are some areas that come to mind from my standpoint. I think also like water is in like surety of supply is, at least in the produce industry where Apeel focuses, I think a looming area that we probably should be talking about more, but it's complicated and a little bit scary, so we don't as much as we maybe should be.
Thinking domestically, the way that we compensate or subsidize farmers for what they grow and how they grow it is like something that I think about a lot. But I think, as Jess highlighted, it's almost overwhelming how many issues are urgent and front and center within food and sustainability. It's really, really hard to pick one, but that's one. If I could wave a magic wand, I think I would change that system as my number one priority. And Eric touched on this already with the farming methodology and how that can contribute positively to averting climate change.
And maybe one more that I'll throw in there that I really struggle with, which is also, it's kind of one of the dualities out there of life that are very hard, is, you know, there's a general movement to eat local, right, and grow local and have everything be local. But at the same time, like in Gorongosa, you know, we're growing coffee on Mount Gorongosa in the rainforest, trying to restore the rainforest. If we can't sell that coffee to developed countries and get money, resources from developed countries back to the ground there, we're not going to be able to protect this rainforest, which has some of the unique endemic, most unique endemic biodiversity in the world. So this is where I struggle, because I'm like, well, we need to be getting resources and funds back to the ground to these smallholder farmers that are trying to protect and restore ecosystems in the global south. But at the same time, it takes a lot of oil to get that coffee from the coast of Mozambique, you know, all the way to our roastery in Boise, Idaho. So that's one that I was put out there as one that I'm struggling with, that I don't have an answer to yet.
I think that's a good point. And it's a common misconception that it's always better, even just purely from a climate impact standpoint, that it's always better to grow or source things locally, because if the conditions aren't optimized to grow that, then it might not actually be better, because the production impacts are often the biggest hotspot in the life cycle of that food. It's usually more significant than transportation. So oftentimes it actually, just purely from a climate impact standpoint, is better to grow it in a place where it's more optimal and you can get economies of scale. I'm also putting a link in the chat here if anyone is interested in food system sustainability. The UN hosted a food system summit this year, which was like kind of a one-time, I mean, maybe it'll happen again, but it's not kind of a reoccurring summit, but recognizing that so many of the UN Sustainable Development Goals really touch on different issues related to our food system. They actually kind of pulled together a summit this year. Probably didn't pick a great year because it was hard to get people there in person and a lot happened virtually, but this link lays out the different action tracks and areas they were focused on around food system sustainability. And there's a lot there to dig into if anyone's interested.
Awesome. I'll just interrupt us for 1 second to say, Jess, Kim, and Eric, if you wanted to pop like some contact information in the chat as well, so people can reach you after this, if they don't get a chance to ask you a question later, or they just want to connect with you and learn more about things. I want to make sure everybody has that information. Part of the appeal of these things is connecting people in the Tufts community who are interested in similar things or looking to get involved. And so in that vein, not to detract from the great conversation, but one of the questions that we have is, what about your experience at Tufts did and did not prepare you for your career in sustainability?
Maybe if I can jump in there first. I took all my classes in the engineering halls. I did not take a single class in social sciences, in like anything else. I even passed out of English because of like a high school AP class, which was amazing from a like technical and scientific perspective, and getting to do research was fantastic opportunities. But I learned nothing about equitability or justice or any of that at Tufts. And now the vast majority of my work is how can you combine sustainability and equitability to start to kind of disrupt some of the financial systems that are out there in the world that extends far beyond food. And so I'm hoping that these days at Tufts, there's much more of a focus on kind of the interdisciplinary, especially for engineers. That was a gap that I was sad that I missed out, because I had friends that came out of Tufts far more woke than I was, and it took like another 7 years for me to even begin to open my eyes to that. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
I lived the same every day that Eric did. I think we were in even the same major in environmental engineering. I think Tufts really taught me like how to look at problems. And I think even in the engineering school, like taking just a more like multidisciplinary approach to looking at them than you might in a traditional larger program. I think for me, because my first job out of school was at the Dow Chemical Company, working in corporate environmental management.
Mhm.
The compared to a lot of my peers at that company, I had just not been exposed to like some of these more practical like logistics and like I knew people who studied packaging engineering, like they studied how to make packaging in the best ways for different materials, and like some of those very practical things that I had never really considered, like, oh, like moving this much material is going to require to build railroads. Like just some of that, I don't know, kind of business, but more on the like practical logistics side was something that was I was like a little bit deer in the headlights at first, just in not thinking through the scale of production and kind of industry that you really don't see in like the Boston area as well. You're not really exposed to it unless you go looking outside. Mm-hmm.
I was not focused academically on sustainability as an undergrad. I was an international relations major, but I did stumble into the environmental biology class at Tufts with, I think, Michael Reed for my science credit. And that was a really eye-opening class for me. So I benefited from the more kind of exposure I got through core curriculum stuff. And that class was eye-opening for many, many reasons. But I felt I was more focused on pursuing a career in business and in tech and in startups at that point, which, you know, is still part of my life. And I had great internships, had good experiences with ELS. As an undergrad, it really helped prepare me for getting into that world. And then I was lucky enough to develop more of a personal interest and be able to head that direction later post-college.
I actually have a quick plug for one specific class that no one would like to plug. In engineering school, and Eric, you probably had to take it too. We had to take technical writing, which was like, it was like grammar. It was, I mean, it was not fun in any means, but it really made you, like every engineer I think had to take it. And it still serves me well today. I just like being able in written form to clearly articulate something in a way that no two people will interpret differently. I have found to be such a valuable skill to have. I probably complained through the whole class, but I feel like I should give that a plug in case like whoever's teaching it needs a pick me up today. I don't know.
Well, that's good advice. I think we could all use a little bit more clear language in a lot of things for many, many reasons. The next question is, you've all kind of been working in this space for some time. How has either your perception of like the sustainability movement or like actually the movement changed from the beginning of your career until now? Urgency, maybe?
I feel like when I started, you had to kind of convince people or sometimes even explain what it was. You know, being in a large organization that was not single-handedly focused on sustainability, especially, there were even points where we had to kind of rebrand projects that I was working on internally to change them from being called green infrastructure to like engineered natural solutions, because more of the field teams would actually implement them if we didn't refer to them as green. Now you're not, and I had, you know, people would just ask me to explain to them what I meant by sustainability sometimes. Now it's such a part of, you know, everyday vernacular that you definitely, like, people get very excited about it. I think the challenge now is that many people with very different backgrounds, everyone is an expert in their own right, and consumers too. And so there can be misperceptions out there that actually make it sometimes even more difficult, because you're not just teaching someone for the first time. You have to kind of break down like the issue Eric was talking about with like, is local always more sustainable, right? Like we like to put things in boxes like, yeah, yes, it's more or less. And the answer is usually that it depends. So there's definitely so much momentum for it and support. And I think we're really heading in the right direction. But as someone working in the field, I think communicating is still challenging, but just in very different ways.
And I would say on this note, maybe two things: one that's more encouraging, one that's a little bit more frustrating. Which, encouragingly, and I'll sound like a broken record here, but sustainability goes much, far beyond the environment to people now. I think we're really starting to recognize and include, people, and recognize how, all of these systems are interdependent and connected. How we approach our food is largely how we're approaching the treatment of people around the world, and how we're giving different people opportunities. And are we providing healthy food to healthy people? Are we hurting the environment that they depend on in the process of producing food? So I think our lens of sustainability, is much broader than it used to be. I think, one of the challenges that I'll say now is ego plays a pretty big role in environmentalism and sustainability. And there's a lot of people that are kind of like my way or the highway, and will get in a lot of academic arguments just for the sake of trying to be right. And we are not in a place right now where like finding our disagreements is going to be helpful. Like we really need to be building bridges and appreciating what somebody else is doing that is helpful, and using that to grow the broader coalition. So I'm hoping that there's a lot more building bridges rather than critiquing in the coming years.
Cool. That's interesting. The work we do at Spoiler Alert, we're generally working not with sustainability professionals. We work more with supply chain professionals. So we talk a lot more about financial incentives and financial goals and recovery of cost than we do about food waste averted. So we've almost taken this sneaky approach where we're able to obviously help companies move the needle on the things they really care about, while also moving the needle on important metrics against food waste. So I've noticed, that hasn't really changed for us. We still kind of speak to our customers in business terms and not in sustainability terms. And it's fortunate that the incentives are aligned there.
Interesting.
I think that's like critical though. I don't think companies could be successful without that, right? If it's not economically sustainable, if there's not incentives. And I do think that the investment community is recognizing that there are companies like Spoiler Alert, or where where it is a win-win. Like you're not actually compromising to get those sustainability impacts. There's so many. I think actually we're going to see at COP a lot of announcements from the financial sector about goals around basically how much money they're going to try to invest in funding climate, or funding the transition, I think is how it's being described.
If I can just briefly add one more piece onto that, because it's election day, and I think it's important to recognize there's a lot of externalities. Now I'll put on my economics hat, in the system that we're not accounting for, like the cost of producing carbon to produce food. So the more and more that we have elected officials in government structures, and they're talking a lot about this at COP26 right now in Glasgow, that incorporate these externalities into our economic systems, then more and more there will be economic alignment with, protecting the planet and restoring ecosystems and all those pieces. So voting is one of the most, biggest things and most important things you can do for sustainability writ large.
Cool. Do you guys have something that you're excited about in your careers in the space in the next year that you want to talk about? Or things in the space in general that you're excited about?
I'm excited for my personal progression. I'm currently serving as chief of staff, but I'm moving into a full-time role with our buyer community. So Spoiler Alert helps large CPGs sell excess inventory into the secondary market. So I'm starting to lead those relationships. And there's so many really great companies now who are entering into the sector of what they call closeout food or excess food. And there's such a new excitement amongst consumers to purchase this, ugly or imperfect or misfit, somewhat close to code date or expiration type of inventory. So I love seeing that. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure we're all like post expiration date eaters here, because we know that that's fake news. But it's really exciting to see that consumer trend and to start working with some of these really innovative companies more closely.
I'm an Imperfect Foods customer. I love them. Big fan. Jess and Eric, you guys have something you're excited about in the space, or like professionally, like a project that you can share and are working on?
Go ahead, Jess.
Well, Apeel's getting bigger, but we're still a startup. So it's sometimes hard to think more than, 6 inches in front of your face. Kim's nodding. Eric, I'm sure feels it too. The area, I don't know how long it will take us to get there, but the area that I get really excited about is Apeel's work in emerging markets. So I probably should have prefaced, Apeel makes a plant-derived coating that's applied to fresh fruits and vegetables that slows down the rate of spoilage. So the fruit or vegetable lasts 2 to 3 times as long. And so this product, while we've implemented it in places like the US and then the EU retail markets, the potential of the technology in emerging markets is far greater, in my opinion. And we've done some kind of product testing and piloting in places like Kenya, but we recently got an investment from the IFC, part of the World Bank Group, where we're spending a lot more focus there. And what gets me really excited is really 2 things. One, increasing that market access that Eric was talking about, because today the inability to trade means, if you're a mango farmer, all of your neighbors are mango farmers, and you just have this local market, and you may not even get the produce there in some instances because of spoilage. But if you can give it legs, even in the absence of the cold chain, or refrigeration, then all of a sudden you have the ability to trade to regional or even export markets. So I think like the social impacts of that could be massive, and we have a lot of work to do to figure out how we distribute and what kind of business models we would need, but also the ability to potentially leapfrog the cold chain in some of these contexts gets me really excited, which is like the impetus to move quickly, because in a lot of places, there are a lot of initiatives to build out cold chain infrastructure, and it's a lot harder to make a change once the system is in place. So that's definitely not going to happen in a year, but hopefully, within a decade, we'll see. But that's what gets me really excited.
That is
Well, I'll say, we're ready in Sub-Saharan Africa, where I would love to get some of those solutions in there. The 2 things that I'm thinking about right now, one is, we're launching this essentially community accelerator, community hub for nature-based carbon projects all around the world. So that's something that's been a passion project of mine, and we're finally like launching. And essentially what it means is like we're trying to create a union of producers around the world who are protecting and restoring ecosystems, growing food more sustainably to get access to carbon credits. So that's just a really exciting kind of grassroots piece. And the other, I kind of work with a couple different groups that are creating these remote sensing systems to look at a landscape and say, what is the soil health? What is the carbon sequestration or emission? What is the biodiversity? All these different pieces and one of them is trying to create a land OS, which is essentially like, operating system for the planet, where you can actually understand, what the ecosystem services that are happening everywhere and every square inch of the planet. So obviously, if we're trying to build these global economic systems for actually, capturing that value, if we can, with technology, capture and quantify those impacts, then we can start to build them in. So I think that really over the next 5 years could fundamentally shift how a lot of our economic systems are functioning, which is really exciting.
cool.
Yeah. The potential for data is massive. It's a pretty archaic industry. So yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. I mean, I feel like I learned so much. I'm obviously not a sustainability expert, but as most people in this day and age, aim to be a lot smarter about it. So we're at 7:10 or 7:10 Central Time. We're going to we have 20 minutes remaining essentially. So we're going to open it up to any of the attendees who want to ask direct questions. There's a few in the chat here. So if you put a question in the chat and you want to ask it directly, feel free. If not, I can ask it for you, but want to make sure that people who want to ask pertinent questions get a chance. So I think I think we're not too many people that if you just want to chime in and kind of ask away, I think we can handle it. If you're thinking of a question, we can start with, this is a good question that came in the chat. Can any of the panelists recommend references or tools that provide an assessment of a food's carbon footprint, perhaps including this question of transportation and efficiencies of scale versus local production?
I don't have a good resource for specific foods. I know a lot of food groups are looking at or making net zero commitments of sorts, and a lot of that information is going to be made public. So most groups that I know are doing the accounting now on their emissions per product. But I've seen a couple groups actually that are also producing, and ironically, I wrote my graduate school thesis on this, which is kind of like a calories, like ingredients thing that you see on a food package, but doing that for environmental impact. So what are the carbon emissions, the water used, all those things, and trying to get that actually on the packages of food. So hopefully something like that is coming soon, but I don't have anything to point you to yet. I don't know, Jess, do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, there really, I mean, and that's a problem, right? There's not one resource where you really can get all of that information in one place, and carbon labeling is on some private companies are starting to just do it, like Chipotle started doing it. There's a couple of others in the US, I believe. It's been introduced into the farm to fork strategy, which is part of the EU Green Deal. But it's hard because you need a lot of data and kind of consistent methodologies. I generally recommend, if you're going to kind of look for things, to make sure it's based on life cycle assessment, because otherwise you're just getting kind of a subset of the footprint. But maybe I can share a couple of papers that I would recommend, either in the chat or with the organizers to distribute afterwards.
That'd be great. Jose, I see you have a question. If you want to unmute, or I can unmute you to ask.
Thank you. Yes, nice to meet you guys. My name is Jose. I represent a company called Raw Reserve. We're a coffee distributor company in Roatan, Honduras. I have a question for Eric, actually. Are you using in your roastery biodegradable package for your beans? And if you are, how much? And if you aren't, I would like to know how big of an impact do you think this could be as a footprint in your company?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually don't work much with a coffee company anymore, so I can't speak to exactly what packaging they're using. I will say for biodegradable packaging, the per unit costs are quite a bit higher than traditional packaging, which is always the challenge, especially for groups that are just starting. In terms of imprint or impact, I don't know, Jess, you have more experience actually in the plastic side than me, and not to put you on the spot here, but do you know generally when it comes to packaging, kind of what the difference is between biodegradable and not is?
Well, there's not actually a great definition of biodegradable. I think that's one of the challenges. I know that FDA, I think last year, decided they were going to start to put guidelines around biodegradable. So there's not like one overarching standard, which makes it tricky because there are kind of different time points that you could consider biodegradable. I'm happy to check in with someone on my team if it would be helpful. But I know for both biodegradable and compostable, there's a lot of gray area around product claims too. So there's like different certifications floating around, but there's not kind of one overarching standard, unfortunately.
Thanks for the question, Jose. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Yeah.
It's opaque is unfortunately the answer.
Yeah.
That was a good
Yeah,
question.
thank you. Thank you.
Anyone have another question? We have some in the chat here, so if no one has one, I can ask that as well.
I do have a question that's sort of a follow-on on this issue of standards in general. I mean, I keep hearing that theme, I guess, of how do you apply carbon assessment standards for the food itself or for the packaging, and it seems just critical. Where do you think that the direction or impetus or leadership around standards in this area is going to come from, if anywhere?
For companies, so this might not exactly be products, but for companies, I actually think it's going to come from the financial sector. We're starting to see companies evaluated. Well, companies have been evaluated based on ESG, environmental, social, and governance metrics for a while, but there's starting to be much more attention to it. Like the SEC is starting to talk about it. There's even recently, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the company Allbirds. They make the shoes that can go. So they're very focused on sustainability. They started going down this path of presenting for like a public offering that had certain sustainability criteria around it. And last I read, as of last week, they're actually pulling back on some of those claims because those ESG metrics are being scrutinized in the same way as their financial metrics, which is kind of a first. Kim is like, I don't know if you have more context on that, but I have not. That's encouraging to me that we're looking at these metrics on the same level. And if anyone's going to really scrutinize, it's probably the financial sector. So maybe that's where, at least for companies, it's going to come into play.
There's 2 UN task forces right now. There's one on financial disclosures related to ESG. And so they're actually defining standards within the finance world. So hopefully there's going to be a UN standard. And there's also a task force for scaling voluntary carbon markets, which similarly has been tasked with coming up with a set of core carbon principles. And then ideally coming up with one, global standard for what is a carbon credit. What does that mean? Because if we're going to create a global, some people are talking about there being a new global currency around carbon in the next 10 years. But if we're going to have anything like that, we got to have a way to measure it and have a standard for it. So, I know that's a lot of the discussions at COP26 are around those standards in particular, but it's a great question and a great space for a lot of, better work to be done.
Going back to that question about how things have changed from when we started our careers in this space to now, like the fact that now we're debating, like, do we all agree on how to do this? And like, how do we actually measure this? I feel like these topics would have not been given much attention 10 years ago. So that's certainly encouraging.
Awesome. We have a question here in the chat. A general struggle in agriculture is the relative lack of profitability versus other industries. Organic produce pricing supports sustainability practices, but organic farming is defined by things you don't do, not affirmative practices. Are any of you familiar with pricing schemes which specifically support agronomic practices and outcomes?
So quickly on the production side, this push towards regenerative ag, I think one of the big challenges is how to make it cost competitive with other forms of production, means of production in the agricultural space. And a big, carbon credits is starting to play a role there. But I think you need to look at, how industrial ag is affecting water quality and all these other pieces. And until we actually incorporate these ecosystem services and these externalities into our economic valuations, we put a price on them. People talk about a carbon tax, for example. That's really the only way that I think some of these, organic farming approaches that like you talk about are going to become cost competitive. So that's and you're up against some pretty big players in the agricultural space that have pretty big lobbying power. So it might be a little more grassroots on this one than not.
Awesome. Jose, I see you have another question. Do you want to ask?
Well, yes, actually, it's more of a comment. Part of our business is distributing a cold brew catalog, and our cold brew catalog is bottled in glass. And why we did it in glass is because here in Roatan, Honduras, that is in the Caribbean, plastic is prohibited. So of course, there's coffee shops that are still working with all their frappuccinos and cold iced coffees and all this in plastic packaging. But we really focused on the terms of the future, like, okay, how can we gain market? How can we gain, like you guys said, like scale economy in this business? Because we did this glass bottling, and we're also using all the ground coffee that we have as a leftover of the process, and we are giving it away to our customers, like hotels, restaurants, for putting it in their gardens and all the trees that are in their properties, for example. Trying to contribute.
That's great. I think we learned something from that. Do we have any other questions? I have a few more if nobody wants to speak up.
I have a specific question really for Jessica, and not, so I'm based at Greentown Labs, and there was a company called Cambridge Crops, I think it was, that provided a coating, or they were working on coating. Sounds very similar to Apeel. What is the space that you're specifically in like? How many other companies are there and working in this area? Because it sounds really very exciting to address a lot of the issues that we have with food spoilage.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it is an exciting space. I think Cambridge Crops is the one who rebranded to Mori is their name now. They have, and I'm not an expert on their technology. I believe it's like based on spider silk is how they make it.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm not sure which produce categories they're focused on. Last I heard, I think it's like kind of leafy green type. So yeah, it's very different. Even though it's addressing a similar problem, it's really different than the Apeel product in some ways. So Apeel's product is plant derived. So it's like essentially mimicking the peel on a fruit or vegetable. So it's made of lipids and glycerolipids that already exist in like the peels and skins and seeds of the fruit. And the way Apeel works is it forms like a complete barrier in the same way that a peel does, a natural peel or skin does, to kind of slow down the rate at which oxygen and water move across that barrier, but similarly addressing a similar issue. It's not a super crowded space yet, and I think Apeel had a little bit of a head start. So I think we're in like 40,000 grocery stores across the US and EU at this point in time. And in the US, we have avocados, limes, and organic apples that we treat. And we launched a product for cucumbers where we replaced the plastic shrink wrap with our product. And then we have, a handful of other products in the EU. But I think it's encouraging that we're starting to see other companies approaching this same problem. And like in that instance, we're not focused, at least today, on things like leafy greens. We need to address all of the different types of food waste. And I think the food waste area, Kim knows as well, has really taken off. There's entire communities of different groups focused on different stages of the supply chain or multiple, or, why food goes to waste, different types of food. So yeah, I think there's fortunately a lot of investment and focus in the area.
Great. We have time for one more. Does anyone have a burning question they want to ask before we kind of wrap up for this evening? Okay. If there are no questions, I think we can wrap up kind of on.
I think there's one hand.
Oh.
I don't know.
Hi.
I can't see all the hands in the same screen. Sorry,
Sorry,
go ahead.
My name's Lori Thibodeau. I'm actually an emergency medicine physician in upstate New York. And one of my goals, I do clinical work, but then I'm also trying to bring sustainability to our hospital because similar to agriculture, the healthcare sector itself is also responsible for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm working with a nutrition specialist within our hospital to try to examine not only, reducing meat and bringing local products and changing our entire platform of the foods that we provide, which include those little tiny canisters that all come with the plastic wraps around them. Like it's mind-boggling, the bad stuff that we do. So I think that the healthcare sector, we are finally catching on that, climate change is a healthcare emergency. It is the biggest, it will make COVID look like a drop in the bucket. And that's coming from someone who lives in New York, an emergency physician who, it's been a really tough year. But I think the healthcare industry is somebody who would definitely partner with all of you. You guys are doing amazing stuff. And there's an organization called Healthcare Without Harm. And I don't know if I'm very new to this. This is something that I have many spinning plates right now. And I would love to learn more about the possibilities of partnering with folks who are working on all the amazing things that you're doing. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Awesome. Well, that was,
I
thanks
just
for
say
sharing that.
thank you, Lori, for all that you've done over the past year and a half, and the fact that you're on top of all that, still thinking about like sustainability. I mean, that's like incredibly inspiring. I'm like so in awe of you right now.
Ditto.
Awesome. Well, I think there's a lot we can learn from the broader Tufts community in this space. So thank you guys for making us all more, well, definitely not experts, but giving us some insight and some things to think about and answering these questions. All of them were super interesting. I know I learned a ton of things. If you look in the chat, Amy's kind of pointing out some resources where you can connect with other alumni who are focused on like-minded things. I saw that there were a couple, I think all three of you posted your LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So like if you want to connect with our panelists after this on something, that would be the way to reach them. And I'm going to hand the speaking over to Elaine for a quick plug on some upcoming events.
Yes. Thank you, Shelby. Actually, it's not a plug for upcoming events, but a plug for a potential experimental program. So I'm the director of the Derby Entrepreneurship Center. I've met some of you, not met some of you. So what we do is we do courses, which Eric didn't take. Well, too bad. But we do courses and we do co-curricular programming with a lot of like educational workshops and events. I haven't seen any alumni this year, but we've paused those events right now. We'll resume them later. What I want to call everyone to action on is we're working on a pilot program to fund jumbos to join jumbo-led new ventures that otherwise would be unpaid. So we're working on kind of connecting students who want to work in a startup, and we're trying to figure out a way to pay them. So I'm looking to interview people who have internships that are either paid or unpaid, who might be interested in kind of picking up an intern this summer. or, I'm looking to talk to anyone for, if you have any ideas for how we can kind of better connect students and alumni. So I'm going to put my lead form in the chat one more time. So it's a Go link. It's just a simple Google form. Please kind of like, if you have any interest in fostering more connectivity between students and alumni, please click that and fill that out. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's everything for tonight. Thank you again to our panelists, and looking forward to, everybody being more sustainable in the future.
Thanks, Shelby, for hosting us.
Of course.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Shelby.